Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be talking all about Ben Horowitz and his book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Yeah.
You're probably here because you want to up your leadership game.
Right.
Maybe snag some startup secrets.
Mm-hmm.
Or just figure out how to deal with all the crazy stuff life throws your way.
Life can be tough.
And this book is packed with all of that and then some. What I love about it is how brutally honest Horowitz is.
Oh.
It's not your typical fluffy business book.
No.
He gets real,
Oh, the struggle.
the really tough calls.
The moments that make you want to just
Quick.
give up entirely.
Exactly.
We're going to take you through his whole journey,
The whole thing.
starting with his, well, let's just say interesting upbringing.
Oh, that's a good word for it.
Then we'll get into the wild world of Netscape and LoudCloud.
Buckle up for that one.
And finally, we'll see how he built this incredible company culture at Andreessen Horowitz.
It's fascinating stuff,
I
but it's
know.
not just about the business side of things, is it? You're right, it's bigger than that.
It's about resilience.
Making the right choices when everything's on the line.
And really understanding what it means to lead when things get...
Or when they get really, really hard.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's kick things off with those early influences.
All right.
Imagine growing up in Berkeley.
Berkeley.
But here's the kicker. Your parents are card-carrying communists.
Wow.
Not exactly your average childhood, right?
No, not at all. Makes you wonder how that kind of background shaped how he tackles challenges later on.
Right?
Like, did it make him more likely to challenge the norm, to think outside the box?
Absolutely. And he actually tells this incredibly powerful story about an experience he had as a kid with racism. Some kids dared him to, use a racial slur to confront a black child.
Oh, wow.
But instead of giving in to that pressure, he ended up becoming lifelong friends with this kid.
That's amazing. It shows he wasn't afraid to go against the grain, to challenge those first impressions instead of just blindly following the crowd, which is, well, that's something that comes up again and again in his management advice later in the book.
Exactly.
Right.
And it wasn't just his family, right? Growing up in Berkeley exposed him to all sorts of different viewpoints.
Oh, I bet.
Through football, academics, even music.
Berkeley's like a melting pot of ideas.
It is. He saw firsthand how different groups reacted to things, like Reagan's policies,
Oh, yeah.
the rise of hip-hop.
That was a huge cultural shift.
It was, and it all really shaped how he saw the world.
That early exposure to so much diversity probably played a big role in his ability to connect with people from all walks of life.
You're absolutely right.
It's like he learned early on that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to leadership.
Right, because everyone's different.
Exactly.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit to his time at Netscape.
Netscape, that takes me back.
This is where he has this big realization that he's been prioritizing his career over his family.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It was a real turning point for him.
I can imagine.
He decides to make a conscious effort to shift his priorities.
Good for him.
And get this, he almost missed out on the whole Netscape opportunity entirely because he didn't have an MBA. Seriously, it's a good reminder that sometimes real-world experience can be even more valuable than those fancy credentials.
Especially in the tech world.
Oh yeah, especially in tech where things move so fast.
Blink and you'll miss it.
Exactly. And speaking of moving fast, his experience battling Microsoft during the browser wars is like a masterclass in how to deal with a serious competitive threat.
Oh, yeah, they were going head-to-head.
They were. They launched Netscape's Sweet Spot.
Sweet spot.
Yeah, it was a bunch of internet applications designed to compete with what Microsoft was offering.
Makes sense.
He had to make some huge decisions under a ton of pressure.
I bet. It's interesting what he says about the importance of speed and being decisive.
Right.
He wasn't afraid to take risks, even when the stakes were super high.
Not afraid to make those tough calls. And then, of course, comes the LoudCloud roller coaster.
Oh boy, LoudCloud.
This is right when the dot-com bubble was at its peak.
Wild times.
They were riding this wave of success with Netscape.
Living the dream.
And then, bam, the bubble bursts and they're facing this harsh reality.
It all came crashing down.
It did. It's a reminder that even the best plans can go sideways.
Definitely. And speaking of sideways, the company's name is actually a funny story. They originally wanted to call it loud.com.
Catchy.
Right. But they ended up with LoudCloud because of a trademark issue.
Oh, no.
Can you imagine having to build a whole company around a name you didn't even want?
Talk about adapting to the unexpected.
It's a perfect example of that resilience Horowitz keeps talking about throughout the book.
You've got to be able to roll with the punches.
Exactly. And he doesn't try to sugarcoat the experience either.
He doesn't.
He talks about how terrifying it was to be on the verge of bankruptcy.
People thought he was crazy.
Literally. He said people thought he was smoking crack for trying to raise money during that time.
It was a rough time to be in the tech industry.
It really was. And he even shares this very personal story about getting a call that his daughter was having a health scare.
Oh, wow.
And this is all happening while he's trying to save his company.
Talk about stress.
He describes literally sweating through his clothes from the pressure.
That's intense. But it's what makes this book so powerful.
You're right.
He's not afraid to show the emotional toll that leadership takes.
It's real, it's raw, and then after all that, the IKO itself is almost a letdown.
Anticlimactic.
Yeah. His CFO, Scott Kapoor, just says, yeah, but we're still fucked.
Oh, Scott.
It's that dry humor, you know? In the face of all this adversity, it just makes Horowitz so relatable.
It's like, even when you hit a big milestone, there's always another challenge waiting around the corner.
Always another hurdle. It's that feeling you get, right?
That we made it, but the work's never over feeling.
Exactly. And that takes us right to the core of this book, Horowitz's management style. This is where he gets real, no fluff, just straight up advice on how to be an effective leader.
And it's refreshing.
Oh, it is. He isn't afraid to go against the grain, you know? Like we were saying, he learned to be a better leader when he stopped with all that forced positivity and just started being honest, even when it was hard.
Remember that line?
My single biggest improvement as CEO.
Yeah. Occurred on the day when I stopped being too positive. It really goes against everything we're told about leadership.
It's all about keeping it real with your team, even when things are tough. He thinks that honesty, even about the hard stuff, builds trust and lets people make better choices.
And it goes for some of the biggest challenges leaders face, like layoffs. He gives this really clear framework for handling those situations, being open and caring when you do it.
He doesn't just talk about how to do it, though. He talks about how heavy those decisions feel.
The sleepless nights.
Yes. The wondering if you made the right call, the feeling you've let people down, even if you know it's best for the company.
He gets it. Leadership isn't always about feeling good or making everyone happy. Sometimes it's about those tough calls and taking responsibility when you make them.
And that brings us to one of my favorite parts. His advice on how to build a great company culture. We hear that all the time, company culture. But Horowitz tells you exactly what it takes to make a place where people love their jobs and do them well.
He doesn't just talk in general terms. He gives you real steps you can take. It starts with knowing what your core values are, those basic beliefs that should guide every decision you make.
And then making sure everyone's living those values every day. It's not just writing them on the wall and forgetting about them.
Exactly. And he's clear that making a good culture isn't a one-time thing. It takes work. It's something you have to keep paying attention to and be willing to change as your company grows.
And the leader sets the tone, you know. He says even the little things you do show people what's important. You're always sending a message, even when you don't mean to.
Like that saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Even with the best plan in the world. If you don't have the right culture, it won't matter.
He's big on having good processes, too. Not just useless rules, but clear, efficient systems that help people get things done without a bunch of roadblocks.
And he tells this great story about how at Andreessen Horowitz, they had this rule where if you were late to a meeting with an entrepreneur,
Oh, yeah.
you had to pay a $10 per minute fine. Sounds kind of crazy, right?
A little bit. But it was also a clever way to show how much they respected entrepreneurs' time.
He was like sending a message. We know your time is important, and we're going to be reliable.
It's a good example of how a little thing can make a big difference in your company's culture.
Definitely. Then he gets into what it's like to grow a company. More growth brings a whole new set of problems. And what worked when you were small might not work anymore when you've got tons of employees.
That's where those one-on-one meetings he talks about come in. He believes managers should be checking in with their people regularly, making sure everyone's on the same page.
And he has a whole system for how to do those meetings right.
They should be about what the employee needs to talk about, not the manager's agenda. It's creating a safe space to be open and solve problems together.
He also talks about how important it is to build a strong team of managers and how to find and train great managers. He doesn't shy away from the harder parts of managing either, like what to do when an employee isn't doing well, or having to give tough feedback.
He even has this idea called management debt, which is really interesting.
Like owing money, but with management.
It's like that, but it's the long-term cost of not managing well. It can add up over time and really damage a company.
And he says you have to deal with management debt head on. You can't just hope it goes away on its own. It takes a commitment to training, making clear processes, and making sure managers are doing their jobs well.
It's about creating a strong base for your company, one that can handle growth and be successful. He also makes a big point about CEOs needing to always be looking at how they're doing and finding ways to improve.
He's all about getting better all the time.
Yes. He wants CEOs to be asking for feedback, even from people who don't agree with them, and always be ready to learn and grow as a leader.
It's that willingness to learn, to admit they don't know everything, that sets great leaders apart.
And that leads us to a really crucial part of the book: leading when you don't know what's coming next. He uses his own experience surviving the dot-com crash and having to rebuild Opsware to show us how it's done.
He talks about staying calm even when everything's crazy, making decisions when you don't have all the information, and being brave enough to take risks even when you don't know how they'll turn out.
And remember that story about how he got advice from T. Boone Pickens, the oil guy?
Who would have thought? It shows that you can find wisdom in the most unexpected places. Sometimes the best advice comes from someone completely outside your industry or your usual group of friends.
Exactly. Be open to learning from anyone who's been through tough times and knows what they're talking about. You might be surprised by what you can learn.
He also says different kinds of leadership are needed for different situations, like when a company's in a crisis versus when things are calm. He calls the leaders who are good in tough times wartime CEOs. They're decisive, action-oriented, focused on survival. And then there's peacetime CEOs. They're more about building systems, making things new, and keeping things stable.
Like needing different tools for different jobs.
And he says the best leaders can change their style depending on what's happening.
And no matter what kind of leader you are, communication is super important, especially when things are uncertain. The CEO has to be able to clearly explain the company's vision, talk about the challenges they're facing, and make people feel confident.
It's about being open and honest, even when you don't have all the answers. It's about being the calm in the storm.
Which brings us back to his overall view of what it means to be a leader. It's not just about telling people what to do or knowing everything. It's about inspiring people, creating a shared understanding, and building something meaningful together.
Which leads us perfectly to the founding of Andreessen Horowitz. This is where all those lessons he learned come together.
And it comes from his deep desire to help other founders succeed, especially the ones coming from a technical background who maybe don't have that traditional business experience.
He saw something missing in the world of venture capital. A lot of firms were just about the money, but he wanted to build a firm that could offer more than just cash.
They wanted to offer expertise, guidance, a whole network of connections, everything a founder CEO needs to do well. They wanted to be true partners, not just people who write checks.
And they really nailed it. I mean, Andreessen Horowitz has become one of the most successful venture capital firms out there, known for really understanding the tech world and for being there for founders every step of the way.
Yeah, they've kind of built a whole world for startups. They don't just put money into companies, they invest in the people building them.
Right. It's about more than just the bottom line.
It's a really powerful approach, and it all comes back to what Horowitz has been through himself. He knows how hard it is to build a successful company, and he's so passionate about helping others face those same challenges.
It's like paying it forward, you know?
Yeah, taking all those lessons he learned, the good and the bad, and using them to help a new generation of entrepreneurs.
It's pretty inspiring stuff.
It really is. As we're wrapping up this look at the hard thing about hard things, there are a few key takeaways that really stuck with me.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the book's full of great stuff, but if you had to pick just a few, what would they be?
Well, for starters, Horowitz's emphasis on honesty. It's not always easy, but being straight up with your team, your investors, even yourself, that's how you make good decisions and build strong relationships.
Honesty builds trust, plain and simple.
Exactly. And going along with that, making transparency a core value can really change a company's culture. It makes people feel safe to speak their minds, share their ideas, and really give their best.
It takes guts to be totally transparent, but the results are worth it.
Another big takeaway for me is how focused Horowitz is on people. He really believes that taking care of your employees is the foundation of any company that's going to succeed.
You know, it's interesting. We tend to think of business as this cutthroat world, but Horowitz shows how important the human side is.
He really does. And he argues that when employees feel valued and respected, they'll work harder to help the company succeed. And that leads to better products, and in the end, more money.
It's a reminder that even in tech, where everything moves so fast, it's human connection and empathy that really build a strong business for the long haul.
And lastly, I think we should remember his advice about finding wisdom in unexpected places. Sometimes the best advice comes from people outside your field or even your usual group of friends.
Like that time he met with T. Boone Pickens.
Mm.
You never know where you'll find that piece of wisdom that completely changes your perspective.
Be open to learning from anyone who's been through it and has something valuable to share. You might be surprised by what you learn.
So wrapping up our deep dive here, I want to leave you with this thought. Leadership is a journey, not a destination. It's about always learning, changing, and growing as you face those new challenges.
And remember, you're not alone in this journey. Every leader, from the CEO of a huge company to someone managing people for the first time, everyone hits roadblocks and makes mistakes along the way.
The important thing is to learn from those experiences, change your approach if you need to, and never give up on what you're trying to achieve.
And, as Ben Horowitz would say, keep building.
That's all for our deep dive into the hard thing about hard things. We hope you found this as interesting as we did. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep leading.